Delicate subject. Chapter 20. She had a new omni-tool. Garrus was extravagantly jealous. Many of her other Cerberus and discovered implants and upgrades were irreplaceable at the moment, and she did not want to mine for a month to replace them. Miranda repaired what she could, but they had other priorities. Jane had physical therapy to do to rebuild muscle mass and hopefully aid in nerve damage reversal with Miranda's assistance. 4 weeks since her return, and progress was good, considering her other options were having the Normandy fully indoctrinated, her shot through the brain, or in a cell next to Dr. Kenson. The Citadel had mostly settled into less insanity, more discipline, without the Normandy's intervention. Udina was under house arrest while they sorted out public and medical and legal opinion over untested brain surgery without consent. Anderson had taken over the full load of council wrangling, and his scan was clean. Tension was high, and that was good. She wanted people on alert. Unfortunately, some of that tension was bleeding out in the form of conspiracy theories flown on the extranet and then taking root in reality. Some were fixated on this not being a Reaper issue, but a biological warfare issue, pointing fingers at any and every organization and species that had the resources to be responsible. Solarians in particular. Since it was known the first case was human, perhaps the STG had developed a way to control humans, and it had mutated to other species, and this was a cover-up. The accusations were personally or politically motivated, and the ones that could not be easily dispelled clouded the issue, making it harder to agree on a course of action. Who was in charge? Who could be trusted? It was a biological warfare issue, so it was difficult to prove a definitive source without people making those Reaper noises. In the meantime, Udina ranted to a stasis screen and talked to reporters who stood, fascinated, on the other side with recorders spinning. Nobody publicly advocated letting him out. It was more like a zoo visit. She could have told him he was always like that when he wasn't in front of a camera. Now he was like that in front of a camera. Hell, even she couldn't tell if he was actually indoctrinated. She knew he was that big of a paranoid, scheming asshole. What she did know is that his political career, at least on the Citadel, was over, and that was good. Maybe she'd find him on some moon compound in 5 years and have to talk him down or ask Garrus to shoot him. She'd rather shoot him herself. Maybe she should teach Garrus rock, paper, scissors. Some ships from every government had gone AWOL, and Garrus was considering taking some of those missions for retrieval, but he was biding his time. She and Garrus both assured each other superficially that Thane was fine, but they fell to avoiding the subject. 4 weeks with no communication other than a cyclic Drell blip was wearing on their faith and insistence. There were hints, though the correlation was difficult. Kasumi, who followed every trail she could with the hints from Keiji's gray box, let Jane know that Hana were beginning to go missing on Kaje. It might just be the whole indoctrination thing, as every species had members going missing. But she suspected Thane. Go Thane. So perhaps he had been able to resist any conditioning he had been given against harming them. Good for you, my love. It's hard. Garrus was waiting to hear from Thane, but also working his ass off on diplomatic issues. They hadn't disclosed that it was Shepard that had been indoctrinated. They had not reported her missing, agonizing over that choice, but ultimately wanting to protect her privacy and command, hoping to recover her fast and get on with life. Betting that if Kasumi and Liara could not find her, Odds were that a general cry would not produce more than a few people who saw her get drunk into a sky car. They had that surveillance, tried to trace the car, found nothing. They had been trying to isolate who might have been the agent in the car with her, but also nothing. In her opinion, he, and anybody else hanging out hired for the day, was dead and dumped somewhere unfindable, if not vaporized or recycled. None of her personal scans were released, no demographics. All data stripped of identifiers other than that this was a human case. They had released only generalized information on the composition, location, and target of the Matrix. Those who wanted to see the index case of indoctrination, nicknamed Subject Zero, cue laugh from Jack, and wanted more details were told it was classified, and that there were now several sources of empiric information based on the alarming number of people from multiple species who were in various stages of indoctrination. Take their pick. Jack offered to introduce herself to the Primarch. Garrus had barked a laugh and politely declined. There had been Turian indoctrination, in the military and in CSEC, and although the Matrix behaved differently and went to different locations in the Turian brain, it was still detectable, still able to be removed. The Alliance and humans in general were more disorganized than the Turians, had more legal issues and a great deal more stalling, and a lot of soldiers, support personnel, and civilians were found to have been indoctrinated. Some of them had not received imprinting and gave no signs other than starting to develop obsessive-compulsive behavior on random issues. So perhaps it was transferable, contagious, or their indoctrinators had abandoned them to avoid detection. Thessia was closed-mouthed and minded about her commandos. Garrus did not hear much from them, but travel was a great deal more restricted, and some information came in from Hera of them having found several agents indoctrinated who had undergone or were undergoing delicate surgery and recovery processes. The Asari mind was much more prone to damage and disruption of function, potentially the loss of the ability to bond, which could result in insanity and suicide. Surgeries seemed to result in a coma, often, and some had not woken. Some that had woken had killed themselves. The Quarians seemed to be mostly immune, maybe due to the difficulty of breaching a suit without also triggering immediate medical attention and concurrent opportunistic infection. It was possible that introduction of the Matrix induced a fatal response. There had been an unexplained hemorrhagic brain condition that had started plaguing and killing Quarians. The bodies had been, Tally said, recycled. Ew. She supposed ship life with no home port and being resourceful would do that, as was Quarian custom, but Tally was waiting for more to come in with horrified expectation. It might be that there weren't enough Quarians alive to bother indoctrinating them, that the Geth were expected to wipe them out, and that was sadly not far from probability. Tally had insisted on scanning. They had scanned, found nothing in the core of the flotilla, but getting everyone to report in was proven difficult, so there may be individual ships affected. They would wait and see, investigate, and Tally would use the time of possible indecision to urge investigation, focus on the Reaper threat over the Geth. The 3 remaining counselors were clean, produced scans, set an example, and clean films became a prerequisite weekly. Nobody who was found to be clean complained, and complaint from those not wishing to be scanned came to be seen as a sign of probable indoctrination, true or not. Some people were just assholes. Peer pressure and high alert encouraged compliance. Some of the casualties Joka had reported came from individual and group reaction to protest about being scanned. Injuries, Panicked deaths from assault or suicide. Mobs had happened in the earlier days. Calm and order were being restored. C-Sec stations had scans posted for each officer on display to encourage confidence and set an example. Batarians and Vorcha were almost entirely booted off the Citadel because the Batarians would not submit to what they thought would lead to invasive procedures. The Vorcha were just Vorcha. No real coherent protest, just refusal. Some of their vessels were stuck in berths, only able to drain their resources and accept automated deliveries, unable to be cleared to leave, and unwilling to get scanned. Eventually, some ships were abandoned, and it became clear that lots of people had gotten off the station without official clearance through shuttles or smuggling. Really, what had they expected? Reason? Jane wondered how Arya was handling this. Or if Arya was indoctrinated. Or if she was just denying entry or shooting people. And if that would eventually become an accepted strategy. Jane wondered if eventually healthy people would begin eliminating not only the indoctrinated, but those who had survived surgery. She wondered how much influence she could even have if it were known she was a survivor. She wondered how far Spectre authorization could override scanner results when she passed through security on any planet. Life. Moving quickly. Garrus was busy and productive, vindicated. She was genuinely glad to see it, her bitter and condemning edge fading as she healed, as she regained her reserve of sleep, of safety, able to count blessings rather than just count. Her habits developed from survival over and on the edge faded slowly. She gained more faith in the healing process, dedicated herself to it as the best thing she could do for herself and for the ship. Discussion hadn't taken place regarding her being restored to command, as she was the only one on board with an active indoctrination incubation chamber, and as they had not determined transmission method, perhaps it was not wise. Garrus joked about assuring her she would get her command back, easygoing and warm, but she shied away from mentioning it. He was doing a good job. She would follow him. She was still a soldier, and a good one. All that really mattered was the mission. She did not want to find out that indoctrination could be sexually transmitted. Talk about unsafe sex. Oh, what a horrid thought. She spent a few hours in the gym every day, most everyone keeping her company from time to time. Even Legion, solemn and careful, comforting. Right now she was alone, taking a particularly defiant to delicious pleasure in stretching. Another thing she no longer took for granted after weeks of restraint. Garrus had discovered that his most effective seduction technique was keeping his hands off her, keeping his distance, walking away. It was perverse, of course, and it worked. Maybe since he'd walked away from her on the CIC and she'd followed, leaned on him. Maybe he'd learned it by accident, maybe on purpose. He definitely knew what he was doing now. He seemed to be enjoying that his detached command of the situation made her bend his way. She was enjoying that he was enjoying it. Just as Yalis had discovered, and Garrus had heard, and had always been the case. Jane was a hunter. It had to be her idea. Tally wasn't here. Thane wasn't here. Garrus had no emotional or physical release, and she wished in part for Thane to return so they could console each other. Maybe let that be that way for a time. A long time. maybe forever. Garrus was still her best friend, her main source of that luxury she had learned to crave and appreciate like stretching. Humor. He'd stopped clenching his fists around her, stopped drawing his brow plates together, and looking at her with longing. Now he looked at her with indulgence, warmth, and his particular friendship that was invaluable, grounding, safe, drawing her in and granting her perspective when she tried to chew on everything at once. When she tried to struggle with the idea of whether or not she'd indoctrinate him if they had sex. He let her chew on other things. In this case, he discovered she liked chocolate, made fun of how it smelled and what it looked like, mocked her response, and brought her more. He didn't spend nights in her cabin. Now it was thoroughly her cabin. Her fear of nightmares had frozen him out. She did not want to talk in her sleep. She did not wish to share the experience. She did not want to fight against an embrace in panic. She was not ready for reverie or the sensation of losing her thoughts. She didn't retract her invitation. She didn't say anything about ending a physical relationship, but he understood miraculously and was not there. Without fear, without failure, without folly. He kept his promise. Let her set her pace and needs without explaining, and he didn't give any signs of distress. Yalis had fed her, yes, but the associations there were wrong. She had not fed her chocolate. Not with laughter. Jane was shedding that skin, still entirely unsure if she could approach sex, but she was craving intimacy. And Garrus gave her that, had learned that her body and mind were healing, and he wanted to be there for that, every day. And then he'd walk away from her, leaving her wanting more. He knew her physical therapy routines and helped her with them. Often arrived, though not every day, when she was working out, but always found her at some point, casual and strong and supportive. She found herself anticipating his arrival, hoping it would be now that he'd find her. And half an hour into her routine, he did, in loose Vakarian blue workout clothing, accentuating his shoulders and the angle of his waist, and... Yep. Just checking. I'm attracted to him. You know, just in case I wasn't sure. She was rebuilding her lust. Maybe if she'd had a human lover, she would be able to try to ease back in. But reverie, the psychoactive aspects of sex with Garrus now worried her the most. That could set her off. That and the fact that his body would feel like restraint, that they couldn't help that. She did not think easing was possible with a Turian, though Garrus was doing his best. Then there was the indoctrination risk. What had Tally said? Hey, Garrus, want to get sterilized? Now there was a corollary to Jane's experience. Hey, Garrus, want to get indoctrinated? Or want to see if I'm going to drive my fist through your eye at high speeds because something set me off? Or want to see if I can cry for 4 hours straight just because I tried to touch you? He smiled at her and worked out parallel, dizzying speed and accuracy on targets as she watched, surreptitiously. Definite stirrings. Her whole analogy to Tally a while back about lighting fires at night. She'd been waterlogged, unable to spark a match, miserable and dispirited, and now... Damned if she didn't want to roast a marshmallow again someday. Someday. Not today. But she had marshmallow ambitions. He walked over wordlessly and helped her with joint isolations. Legs were difficult, and shoulders and neck still stiff or numb. He helped her balance and stretch, ending with her down on the mat, with him pushing gently on her lower back until she was fully leaning forward over her knees, trying to relax into the tight pull. His thumbs rolled up along her spine and back, not on her skin, only over her shirt, pressed and held until she came up for the release. He helped her rotate her shoulders, then start the cycle over, balance, stretch, relax. He smiled and left her at the end of her reps, and she was, as always now, disappointed, and then disappointed at being disappointed. And then she laughed, went on to the next cycle of exercises. So, that was her Garrus for the day. With a crooked smile, she continued on. But at least she had some Garrus in her day. About 20 minutes later, he came back in with a milkshake and pudding. I can't believe you eat this stuff. Are you absolutely sure? Where did you get this? She knew dairy was not common. There were no cows on the Citadel. It was rare and expensive everywhere but Earth. They hadn't set into a port. There was no real substitute, so she expected it to taste like chalk. She might hit him if it had tofu in it. He wouldn't know. He shrugged at her. Scraped it off the bottom of a crate that had been leaking. That's what it looks like, anyway. I feel guilty suggesting it. He offered a spoon of pudding, not too close, not too far away, just watching her intently, indulgently, a half smile as her eyes closed. She tasted it and said, "That is so good. You need calories." She had lost weight, trouble with appetite, trouble with regaining it. She gestured at his offerings. "I've got them. Where did you get this?" He offered her another spoonful. "It's my ship. I get what I want." After savoring another bite, she said, "How come I couldn't get it when I wanted it, when it was my ship?" He shrugged. "Perhaps certain people don't owe you enough favors." He offered her a sip through the straw. The vanilla milkshake was absolutely real. So was chocolate pudding. Unbelievable. She asked him, "You know this bribery thing? I think I'm getting used to it." "I have no idea what you're talking about. You have a devious mind. It's not a bribe. Think of it as an incentive." She grinned. "Like training a dog? Good girl? Roll over?" You have interesting phrasing and a devious mind. This works on dogs? Think I should get one? She had no immediate answer for that, was not going to use the word bitch, so instead she ate, sipped, and admired this precious man who was doing his best to care for her without ever touching her. She supposed he had practice with Tally, and he couldn't even see her face or feed her, but felt grateful and blessed to be able to hold her, to talk to her. He couldn't hold Jane, but they both had built-in faith that he would. She could see that far only right now, touching him without it being an obstacle course, a dare, maybe being on his lap without panic. The idea of his arms around her still brought on panic. Baby steps. Baby steps in Derry. She had gotten over maybe not the same magnitude of issues, but issues before. Maybe gotten over was not exactly the right word, but she could do this. When she was done, he stepped a little closer, and she didn't feel the need to step back. He looked at her lips. You have a little. Her brow raised. A little? Anything to get him to talk some more. His mouth relaxed. A little crate lube, right? There. He pointed to her lower lip. She lost her composure. Right. What? You mean like here? She brushed her finger along the lower plate of his mouth. Warm birch, mint, and a little tremor. A little tightening. No panic. Well, maybe a little from him. She was teasing and calories. His eyes closed, and then opened, and he didn't move. Yes. Exactly there. She swiped at her chin. You got it. He had a warm voice, like chocolate. He was the reason why intimacy was now craveable. She licked the smudge off the side of her hand, and his smile deepened. Then he took the empty containers and turned to go. She said, someday I'm going to have to explain the significance of a s'more to you. She knew that symbols were important. Fire, marshmallow, chocolate. She couldn't figure out the meaning of a graham cracker in this case, but she supposed she had wonky symbols anyway. Symbols she wanted to share with him. He paused and turned his head partway to her. I'm guessing that's a disgusting human thing? She nodded enthusiastically. Absolutely. He turned back to leave. Some other time. I think that's enough for today. But you're looking forward to it. He went through the door and lifted a hand in a backward wave. I have no idea what you're on about, Shepard. I have no interest in disgusting human things. She loved him so much. And he was getting to be just him. Just someone she wanted to be near. Not out of duty or obligation or fear of losing him otherwise. Someone who cast a spell where she was safe and laughing and leaning. She was regaining her appetite. He had to tell her where he got pudding. He had to. 2 days later, Garrus motioned her aside while she was speaking to Legion about escalation between Geth and Quarians, led her to the conference room. He indicated that she sit down, and then he leaned against the table next to her, arms crossed, with his serious Garrus face. With a serious Garrus pause before speaking. He watched her carefully. Thane wants to meet. Blood rushed through her, relief and apprehension. He wants to meet on Ilium. He has relayed several reasons for not rendezvousing directly with the Normandy. He is, let's see, mindful of the question of his welcome on several fronts, that he left the ship, that he had opportunities to check in or update or ask for assistance or provide reassurance, either as a person to those who care for him or as a crew member with a duty to the ship. But he took none of them. He would like to explain his reasons. He stated that he would respect our choices if those circumstances are seen as a severe breach of trust, and he would understand, if not agree with and urge, serious consideration of unwillingness to allow him back onto the Normandy, or even to meet. He states he has been in close contact with Yalis and is aware of the risk of indoctrination or collusion that implies. He's forwarded his scans, but is aware that those can be faked, and the scan is from an illegal source. But he presented it to show that he is mindful of the difficulty of proof. There are scanners available on Ilium. He would submit to them in my presence, but it would likely result in arrest without Spectre authority overriding it, and he does not wish to involve you at any point in negotiations. He asked that he be restrained when I meet with him, and informed me that I may choose or not choose to release him. I may otherwise turn him over to Ilium Security or any other agent that I choose. Thane was mindful. Right. He needed to tell us that because we'd forget otherwise. She was properly apprehensive, not crazy apprehensive. Still, pretty damned apprehensive. Willing to be restrained, will be restrained. Oh, fuck. She listened for the parts of the conditions that were intended for her, relayed through Garrus. Because Thane did not want to cause her a breakdown due to his presence as an assassin, as a lover, as a reminder of what she'd been through at the hands of someone with his training. He wanted her to see him coming from a long way away. He wanted Garrus to protect her from that if he could, if she would allow it. Garrus turned his head and looked at her. Thane wants to speak to me, resolve the issue of rejoining the vessel or remaining off. He asked me to ask you for your permission or bar, and he asked me to take that into account. That he would follow my commands and accept my judgment only so far as I was the commander, but that if you disagreed, he wished for me to honor that. Conditionally, if I have temporary use for him, in his words, he would function as an agent off the ship, but that if you were deemed commander again, he would leave at that time if you expressed that interest anywhere in the interim. He does not wish to step back on the Normandy without your blessing. After and if he has passed my and his security concerns, he would also like to meet with you privately on Ilium, if and only you will allow it. He asked me to not try to influence or understand your decision, but to accept it as an absolute. The offer of him being restrained extends to your presence, if that's what you want. If you disallow him, either on the ship or speaking on Ilium, he urges me to respect that. But he has intel and recovered samples of drugs, tech, and methods he wishes to provide, the fruits of his absence. Securing them was his motivation for not coming back in earlier, and he believes them worth the time, separation, and effort. He is willing to turn them over to any other agent if I choose not to accept the risks of contact or association with him, or if you wish, to destroy them sight unseen. I don't want to ask. He doesn't want to have to ask. He's trying to preserve your choices, lessen anxiety. And it screams trap and raises anxiety higher. Yeah, that. I can't make the call for you. And I am in deep, dark waters here, and I can only see the surface. And that's bad enough. Have I mentioned Turians can't swim? Is there anything you can say that will give me some insight without me unduly influencing you? I'm asking as a commander, but I'm also asking as myself. Whatever our choices, unless we demanded it, he wouldn't disappear. He says he'd always be able to be contacted if we changed our minds. If we wish to do this at another time, or if we need further information. He is grateful you are healing, regrets abandoning us, hopes to explain his reasons. He told me that he loves us both. I assured him I loved him as well, but I'm blind here. I don't know what you want. I know you don't want to talk about it, and you're not required to talk about it, but you do need to make a choice. And I need to understand what it is you want so I can enter into negotiations with that in mind. I agree with him that it is entirely up to you. I love him, but if you have reasons to bar him from the Normandy, and he is going this far to establish that they may exist, I won't put the ship in jeopardy. I won't put you in jeopardy. I'll take your word for it. Maybe sometime later you can explain. If you can't, I'll still take your word for it. I don't know if you know what you want. If you can know what you want. You've been traumatized by a Drell assassin. Venom used against you. I also know you, and I know him. I am betting your curiosity will overcome your caution. And he knows that too. That's what makes it a potential trap. Yalis failed to turn you. I don't know if they have history or any system of honor among assassins or owing each other allegiance over others. I don't think she can just give up and go home. The Hanar seem the sort who don't accept failure, and the obvious course, if they can't turn you, is to kill you. But I do not know enough to navigate. She felt a familiar and blessedly reassuring and alarming stirring of instinct. She smiled at him and said, "What do we do with traps?" Garrus said with mock weariness and some relief, either at the opportunity to speak to Thane or at her alleged recovery. "We walk right into them. Over and over." Her mind was professional, considering work and not personal implications, and she was intensely grateful for that vital gear shift. She tried to clarify. For Garrus. He could be indoctrinated. He could be turned. She's very convincing. There's no way to know. Did he say where she is? She didn't need to feel sickened because the question was not one of personal concern. She needed to know because it mattered. Her tentative control was holding, and she was grateful for the tide being held back successfully. He shook his head. "No, but I also didn't ask. He needs to establish that trust is possible at all. Right now he's acknowledging that it may be impossible based on our points of view, especially based on yours. Love, but not trust, was discussed. The rest will have to wait until after we establish the rules of engagement. To put it in Thane terms, I'm getting that he does not wish to assume that communication is possible at this stage or impose upon our trust, or influence your decision through manipulation of facts and your curiosity. He looked her more directly in the eye. You know how he is. Better than I do. I don't know if you're ready for this. She smiled again. Garrus, what do we do with traps when we're not ready for them? He smiled and ducked his head. I can't decide if you are the bravest or the stupidest person I have ever met. Both. I go with both. It's not just for my benefit. He knows you, too. He's saving you the need to be the one to bar him from the ship, and from me yourself. He's given you an out by setting the security conditions that you don't need to insist on, and allowing you to make choices based on what I want, releasing you from responsibility otherwise if I feel, we must abandon him. You've thought about it. Garrus's jaw moved, and she thought that motion meant he was running his tongue over his teeth, thinking, testing a sharp point. Yeah, I've thought about it. A lot can happen in 4 weeks. A chess piece is not enough information to go on here. You want to talk to him? She shrugged. Putting personal issues aside, which I can. Barely, but I can. I don't think we have a choice. This could lead to knowing exactly what my indoctrination process was, what drugs were used, and possibly the method and sample of the Reaper tech that leads to indoctrination. Yeah, if it's a trap, he is right about my curiosity. We can't pass that up. He's laid out the obstacle course, and the obstacles are set in theory for our benefit, not his. But consider that before he even gets to me, he could kill you. And then the Normandy has no commander, and I'm walking wounded. Right there. That could be mission accomplished. He could be making you think I'm the target, setting up elaborate conditions that require your cooperation and presence. He could set you up, kill you, and disappear. It's enough of a possibility for both of us to say no immediately, and that's your call. You're risking your life more than I am risking mine. But I don't think that's what's going on. I mean, I think it's a potential trap worth springing because of the bait or the reward of trust, depending on your point of view. The restraint thing is a nice gesture, but meaningless, as he could probably break out of or fake most methods. I'd recommend insisting on dismissing that condition outright, on the grounds that you're not that stupid. Turning him over to authorities, though dramatic, is not going to happen. I'm sure he knows we'd handle anything ourselves, but it's possible he's offering so we are aware how seriously he takes this, and how dedicated he is to our safety and security. Or trying to lull us, but we're not easily lulled people. If he wanted to kill us, it would already be done, and we'd be having this conversation in the afterlife. He's trying to offer his incarceration so we know where he is, so we're not haunted by him being out in the galaxy doing unseen Thane things. Hell, for all we know, he's on the ship right now, in this room. Garrus's hand was massaging the back of his neck. This is not how I imagined him being restrained when I saw him again. That, in combination with the fact that Thane was alive, that she might get the answer she wanted, made her lose control over several impulses at once. A sense of celebration, of camaraderie, of doing more stupid, brave things together hit her, and she started to laugh. Sharing plans and humor caused warmth and collapse and a slide of so many good things. Why she felt so lucky and why she was so lucky. She couldn't remember why she was so far away from him, why his hand didn't move to hold hers when it seemed like that's where it should be. Then she remembered it was her fear making that impossible, and she could fix that. She was fast, and he was startled as she stood, put a hand on his far shoulder, and pulled herself into his lap, nearly knocking him back on the conference table due to his precarious angle. But she could have worked with that, too. Her arms went underneath his arms and wrapped around his back. Her legs went around his waist, and she belonged there. Failure and folly, but no fear. Well, no fear with this much adrenaline. He pulled in a tight, startled breath, his arms braced on the table, talons out and digging into the surface, his legs beginning to tremble. She kissed him, her mouth pressed to his, both closed tight. She thought, mine. They're mine, and the galaxy can't have them, won't take them. I won't let it happen. I don't own them, but they're mine because they said so. They have to hear me say it, too, that I'm theirs. She said against his mouth between nudges of her lips, I owe the man at least one life of mine. At least enough trust to talk to him, give him a chance. Show him I believe that 4 weeks isn't long enough to break him, that if he's indoctrinated, we can do something about it. That's the hand we've been dealt, Commander Vakarian. I say if we have to choose between all in or all out, I'm all in. A shudder went through his body. Please, don't die. Don't throw your life away, Karim. Please promise me you will be the brave part and not the stupid part. Spirits, I can't tell anymore. Maybe the stupid part is better. She smiled and kissed along his mandible. You know that deal. I can't. I'll bring him here, get him scanned, then you can talk. She thought as she kissed along his throat. Bring him here, get him scanned, bring him back down to Ilium. I don't want to be monitored. He won't be able to say what it is he wants to say here. And then she thought, and neither would I. She really thought hard about telling Garrus all of it, because of his command, because of who he was. She thought of saying, think of terrible things. Think of them happening to me. Not the terrible things you already know. Worse, deeper, twisted, corrupted. Think that they made me who I am, or I made them because of who I am, and that I can't change them, and I can't change me. Think that one happened now, and one happened 10 or so years ago. Thane has seen them, and he wants to make sure I don't see them, feel them, every time I look at him. But she couldn't say it. Not to protect herself now, but to protect Garrus. She couldn't. Garrus knew things were there, things in the dark, deep waters. But sensing something blurry and far away was much better than the raw stories in his mind. He couldn't change it. He couldn't help her more than he already did. She also couldn't force his curiosity out in the open, tease it, make him hold back the need to know the way he held back his hands right now, restraining himself. She couldn't let him catch the scent or follow the trail. Corbin shouldn't get into someone else's head. Yalis should not be in Garrus's head. That's what they would want, to spread their infection, and Jane would not allow it. They represented virulent disease, the intent and power to corrupt. It was like her indoctrination. It was part of her. It was in deep. It couldn't be removed, but it was under control, and it should not, under any circumstances, be cracked open for examination to prove its existence. It shouldn't be shared just so her misery could have company. He knew Yalis was a clear and present danger. He had tactics to deal with what she was capable of doing. Jane had disclosed every risk Yalis was to the Normandy, to her crew. She had done that first and with no reservation. They'd changed every code and access protocol. The odds that Yalis was going to show up and attempt to seduce Garrus were non-existent. He knew who she was and what she did, if not all she did. He knew enough right now to navigate the necessities of command. He knew more than enough to navigate the necessities of being Jane. He was helping her navigate her own minefields. She wanted him safe from the full shockwave. She wanted to know she wouldn't inflict that on him. He already knew the power of Drell assassin venom and sex, and would not be blindsided by her silence on the subject. Did not telling him also protect Jane's privacy and the possible extent of her crazy? Yeah. Was compulsive confession and the damage it could do to his psyche justifiable when shit was bad enough right now? Was it too late to tell him anyway? She would not have considered it unless it was an emergency affecting her job. Would that set a template for the distance he would keep from her? Would he think she wasn't telling him because she didn't trust him? I don't know, but my instincts do, and I'm going with them. Protecting herself expanded to protecting her, protecting Garrus, and protecting Thane, and protect wasn't a bad word. She could provide an umbrella that covered them all in the downpour. He could know they needed the umbrella, whether or not it was raining water or thresher acid, as long as the umbrella could take it. He'd put his finger into the downpour. He didn't need to feel it on his entire body, have it sink into his bones. He knew it was bad. He took her face between his trembling hands. I see you are all in. I see what you want to do, but you have to go slowly in. Let us wait for you. Let me. Don't dive into this, onto me like a grenade. You know how much I want you, but I need to learn you over again. You need to allow that you've changed. Promise me, Karim, that you will not rush into something brave and stupid when you could walk, even be carried, and still get there. I see your face, and I remember you running on a broken leg, and I will not let you do that again. I can't tell if you feel it or can't feel it, or which one would be worse. Please. I am begging you. So, you're asking me to roll over? He touched his crest to her forehead. I'm so transparent. You haven't promised. She thought that Thane would, had to, and wanted to carry this for her, or with her, if what he had to say, what she had to say meant he could stay with her, with them. She knew She couldn't touch him. She couldn't. But 2 weeks ago she couldn't touch Garrus. She'd choose hope. Garrus understood that she didn't want to be touched. Thane would understand. Garrus and Thane would be together, and she could get her shit together or fail to get her shit together, but she wouldn't take what they had built with each other from them. It was okay to be who she was now. Maybe forever. Thane would understand. If she understood Thane's message, he was well, he had been successful, and he wanted her to know he would not sneak into her room in the middle of the night to watch her sleep, that all permissions would be rescinded and regained only if possible, that he would accept, if not demand, just as Garrus was doing, that she stop and take it slowly. Possibly take it backward. Possibly never move forward. Or he was turned, and he could take her life, any influence or power she had, the possibility of command, and Garrus from her, permanently. He had already been in that position for a long time. Then again, maybe Thane came out of this last month not wanting to think about sex at all again, ever, with anybody. He had just potentially spent 4 weeks with Yalis. That could go rough on a person. She'd worried about him for good reason. Jane had changed. Maybe Garrus did not want her as much as he had. Maybe not at all, but he could not tell her that. Maybe Thane would not want her at all. Lust and fury and loss. And a job to be done, which she could always do without lust or fury. But it always came with loss. Thane's conditions were likely less about the risk of him killing anybody, and more about him attempting to protect her mental health and offer her an opportunity to do her job at the same time. If she were to bet on it, she would guess that Thane had spoken to Edie before speaking to Garrus, and knew Jane was well. Not as fucked up as she had been. Maybe he'd spoken to Edie before now, and chose now as the time when she seemed not quite as crazy. Capable of discourse. She would be that. Capable of discourse. Capable of doing a job. She relaxed everything she could and said, "Okay, I promise. You've changed too. You are allowed to change, and I'm sorry," he interrupted her. "If you apologize, I'm hitting you." "Okay. Would you please come to my cabin and talk to me? Read me a story. Just be Garrus at me. With me." "I can do that. I will do that, Karim. When you're done working. Seems being a commander is a pain in the ass." He stood up on steadier but not yet steady knees, about the same as hers, put her on her feet, and brushed his mouthplates over her hair, embraced her briefly and gently, a slide of plate and warmth on fabric. You have no idea. Oh, right. You do. I'm going to go reassure Thane that a missile strike is not headed to his current position, and I'll let him know your decision. We'll set course to Ilium. I'll make the arrangements. We'll work it out. Tell me what you need, if you can, and I'll figure out the rest. Okay. He left the room. Most of her courage, confidence, and warmth went right out of the room with him. Her immediate thought, staring at the closed door, was, what the fuck did I just agree to? Her second thought was, walking into a trap before you're prepared. Third thought was, so, getting back to business as usual. Yep. Okay then. Just checking.